Okay, so we'll examine in this presentation the final events that happen before Jesus returns. We've touched on some of them this morning. We're going to go into them in more detail. There's a lot the Bible has to say about this. In fact, I could probably teach a 40-hour course just on this topic, and you probably couldn't exhaust it. There's a lot there, so we're just going to hit the highlights. And so strap on your seatbelts, all right? It's going to be a ride. 2 Thessalonians 2, 3 and 4. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God and that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. So this is the thing that we look at. God, just before Jesus comes, is going to be this man of sin that is going to stand up and put themselves in the place of God, right? So what religious power today claims to be God on earth? This is the sin of blasphemy, right? Blasphemy is to claim to be God. John 10:33 is one example. The Jews answered Jesus, saying, "For a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God." Right? So Paul tells us that Jesus won't come until this man of sin is revealed, and he will claim to be God. So let's examine scriptures that help us identify this man of sin. So to do that, we need to come to Daniel chapter 7. Now, Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 are both prophecies that are dealing with pretty much the same subject matter. And in our series of lessons, I don't actually go through Daniel chapter 2, but I would encourage you to go and read it for yourself. But Daniel chapter 7 here, we see both of these have to deal with four major kingdoms. And I'll talk about that briefly, but let's read for now. Daniel 7:3 says, "And four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. And I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. And a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. And after this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, who had on its back 4 wings of a bird. And the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. And then if we skip to verses 23 to 26, we read, Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and laws. And then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it forever. So as I mentioned, Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 are linked together. There's these 4 kingdoms, the 4 major kingdoms. Now these 4 major kingdoms are the ones that directly affect God's people at the end of time. It doesn't include every kingdom that exists on the earth. It doesn't even include every long-term kingdom that exists on the earth. It specifically is dealing with kingdoms that have to do with God's people or affect God's people in one form or another. The first kingdom represents Babylon, and that's represented by the lion with the wings. So the lion represents strength, and the eagle's wings represent speed. And the beast made to stand like a man points to Nebuchadnezzar's conversion in Daniel chapter 4. This is an artist's representation of the statute, Daniel chapter 2, but it works in the same order as we see in Daniel chapter 2, the same order is being used for Daniel chapter 7. So the head of gold is Babylon, which was in Daniel chapter 2, and in this case is the lion. Then we have the Medes and the Persians that come afterwards. In Daniel chapter 2, it's dealing with the silver arms. In Daniel chapter 7, we're talking about a bear with 3 ribs in its mouth and on one side. And then you have the belly and thighs of brass, which represents Greece. And that is the leopard with 4 wings that's found in Daniel chapter 7. And then you have the legs of iron, which is that fearful and great beast that we see mentioned in Daniel chapter 7. And that represents Rome. Right? So the second beast represents Medo-Persia, which conquered Babylon in 539 BC. The symbol of the bear represents its meanness. And the bear raised up on one side suggests a dual power with one side stronger than the other. And that's in fact what we see in history, is that initially it was the Medes that were stronger. And then Cyrus came, and he was a Persian, and he was able to turn it around, and the Persians became stronger, even though they were weaker. So this is represented in that bear. The 3 ribs left in its mouth speaks to its voracious appetite. I'm going to go through this very quickly, but because I'm trying to get to that 4th beast, because the 4th beast is really what we're going to spend our time on. But the 3rd kingdom represents Greece. And so Alexander the Great came and conquered the Medes and the Persians. He captured Susa in 331, and he set the capital on fire. And Greece is the only beast power that is given dominion. Remember, I was referring to that earlier. It's that Greek, I think it was this morning that I was talking about it. Greece, Greek culture, Greek religion, Greek philosophy has had a tremendous impact on the world to this day, right? It speaks to the pervasiveness and dominance of Greek culture, religion, and philosophy worldwide. It affects us in so many ways that we don't even appreciate. But one of them, for sure, is in our understanding. Remember when we talked about this morning about the immortal soul? This comes, for instance, from Greece. But so many other things also come from there. Another aspect that comes from Greece, by the way, that affects us is this idea that flesh is evil and spirit is good. And so then you beat the body in order to get the spirit out. So because the flesh is evil. The Bible, of course, talks about the battle between the flesh and the spirit, but not because the flesh in and of itself is what's evil. It's the nature within us that's evil. But this has been used, essentially, to talk about the fact that we want to release the spirit, and that spirit will live forever. Anyhow, so that's the Greeks. The 4th kingdom represents Rome, which defeated Greece in 146 BC at the Battle of Corinth. And this 4th kingdom would eventually divide into 10 smaller kingdoms. There's this book that I was reading in preparation for this by Gibbons. Was written over 100 years ago. Over 4,000 pages in this book detailing the history of Rome. And hundreds and hundreds of books, if not thousands of books, have been written about the history of Rome. Suffice it to say, there's a lot of history. One of the things that I have as a takeaway, having just skimmed through this book, is the fact that we sometimes think that things are worse now than they've ever been. But a lot of the stuff that went on back then was extremely evil and extremely bad and very corrupt. Human beings have always been corrupt because we have always had this sinful nature, right? This broken nature. So the 4th kingdom would divide into 10 kingdoms, and this is represented as 10 horns, or 10 kings. The 10 horns are the 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom. Now, after this period of 10 kingdoms, a final horn, a little horn power, would come up and uproot 3 kingdoms. And this little horn power was still considered to be part of Rome. It's the same beast, right? Horns belong to the beast, so it's coming out of that horn. And Daniel 7:8 tells us that this little horn power would speak great things. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous things. Now, when we're talking about man, it's interesting that it talks about eyes of a man, because in in the beast, the first beast, remember the lion's wings are plucked off and it's made to stand up like a man. It speaks to Nebuchadnezzar's conversion as found in Daniel chapter 4. Well, here we find eyes like a man and a mouth speaking like a man. It has the appearance of being someone who is Christian, someone who is speaking for God. But it's only eyes as a man. It's not an actual man because, in fact, it is part of the beast. And beasts in the Bible are always evil powers working against God. So let's recap. There's 4 kingdoms on earth from Daniel's time to Jesus' second coming. The 4th kingdom will be different than the others. 10 kings would come out of that one empire. And after the 10 kings appear, another power would come up. And it would speak great things, and it will uproot 3 kings or 3 kingdoms. So then this helps us in history to be able to identify this beast power. This is what we're doing here. We're following a trail, right? We're following a set of clues in order to get to the place where we can identify this beast power. Because at the very end of time, we're going to see shortly, at the very end of time, there's going to be 2 main beasts that are going to have an impact in the history. The first beast and the second beast mentioned in Revelation 13. And again, prophecy is a very deep thing. We could go for hours and hours and days talking about prophecy and all the minutiae of prophecy. But Revelation is based on or built on the foundation of the prophecy books like Daniel in the Bible. So Daniel and Revelation are very clearly linked, as are Ezekiel, as are Jeremiah, and some of the other prophetic books are all linked back to Revelation. But here specifically tonight, we're looking to connect who it is at the end of time that's going to cause trouble for God's people, right? Now, this little horn power comes after the Roman Empire broke up. So that helps us as we look through history. We know that the empire broke up by about 476 AD and was divided into 10 kingdoms. So as we're following the set of clues, we can then know that we're looking for a kingdom that came after 476 AD. Now, the historical 10 kingdoms, and by the way, get these right because we're going to have a quiz, all right? The Anglo-Saxons, the Franks, the Alemanni, the Lombards, the Ostrogoths, the Heruli, the Vandals, the Burgundians, the Visigoths, and the Suevi. These are the historical 10 kingdoms. Actually, some of this you find is fluid in history. Different kingdoms pop up and disappear, and they pop up and disappear. But the main 10 kingdoms are these. Okay, and by 538 AD, we find that 3 of these kingdoms were wiped out or seriously weakened. And these 3 uprooted kingdoms were the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, and the Vandals. The Vandals are the ones who are mostly in North Africa. The Ostrogoths were mostly in Italy. And the Visigoths are mostly in Spain, modern-day Spain. And so which kingdom took its place? Well, that's the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic papacy specifically, because the papacy is essentially whoever's pope is king of the church, right? And king not only of the church, but king of the Vatican lands. So Revelation 13:1 is where we notice this beast that I talked about. I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. So beasts in the Bible, prophecy represent evil kingdoms. Revelation 17:15 says, "The waters which you saw where the harlot sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues." If I go back to Revelation 13:1, you see it says where? I saw the beast rising up out of where? It's out of the sea, right? So sea in Bible prophecy represents a place with lots of people. If we look at the papacy came out of which area of the world? Which is Europe. Were there lots of people in Europe in that time? Yes. Lots of kingdoms around it? Yeah. So that fits. Having 7 heads and 10 diadems tells us that it is the same power as in Daniel 2 and Daniel 7. So this links the beast from Revelation to the beast that we see in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7. It mentions 42 months that it's given power over the saints. 42 months is 1,260 days based on lunar calendar of a 30-day month. And so if we take the date of 538 with the defeat of the Ostrogoths in Italy, we come to 1798 AD. And what happened in 1798 AD? Well, in 1798, General Berthier, under the command of Napoleon, took Pope Pius VI prisoner, and effectively that ended the Pope's civil authority. So you remember, the Pope isn't just the head of a religious organization, he's also the head of a state. So he has political power as well as religious power. There are very few people on earth that have that position. Another one would be the Queen of England. Okay, the Queen is both a monarch of England as well as the head of a religion, right? The Anglican Church. We also find I believe it's the Ayatollah Khomeini who has that same kind of position. So some people might rightfully say, well, how do we know that it's the Catholic Church and not one of these others? Well, we're following this trail, and we follow the claims of what the papacy has made, and I can promise you that no monarch of England has ever claimed to be God on earth or ever claimed to be the voice of God on earth. No monarch of England has been specifically involved with changing the laws of the land as the papacy has, right? So this civil authority of the papacy wasn't restored until 1929 when Mussolini gifted Vatican City back to the papacy. But if you look at the papacy before the 18th century, okay, and the papacy after 1929, it didn't have the same kind of power over kings and over kingdoms that it had before. So even though it's had some of its power healed, it's not fully healed yet. That's something that's going to happen in the future. Revelation 13 speaks of two beasts at the end of time. So that was the first beast. Now we have the second beast. It says this other beast is coming up out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. So first of all, you'll notice that this second beast is coming up from the earth. So if it's coming up out of the sea that represents lots of people, then what do you think the earth might represent? Few people. That's right. So it has horns like a lamb, right? So what does that mean? Well, 28 times in Revelation, the lamb refers to Christ. And this one time in Revelation 13, a lamb is associated with an evil empire. So it suggests a kingdom that presents itself as Christian, but has evil intent. The dragon reference points to a darker origin, right? So again, if I back up my slides here, should have had that in my slides, so I don't have to back up. But if I go here, it said here that he had two horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon, right? So if I come back now here, Revelation, so the dragon reference is concerning because in Revelation 12:9 we see this reference. The great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So essentially, to be referred to speaking like a dragon is to be speaking like Satan, right? And so Revelation 13:12, it says, he, the second beast, exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. So the dragon is in Revelation 12. Revelation 13, we find the first beast, the second beast. Powers of the first beast and second beast are given to them by Satan. Right? So if we look at the identity of the second beast, we're looking for it coming up in a place where no kingdom previously existed. Okay, not a lot of population. It was birthed in peacefully. It represents itself as Christian. It speaks like Satan. So in other words, out of the treasure or the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? It points to a beast that presents itself as Christian, but does things that are questionable, right? Speaks like Satan, and it's a worldwide power that can force the whole world to worship the first beast. And it is sympathetic to the first beast, becoming a spokesperson, and it comes into being after the first beast, so after 476 AD. So we follow all of those clues, And we can ask ourselves, right, which world power represents itself as a Christian nation but has the heart of Satan? Right? Again, this is the reference I brought up of Jesus, right? A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart brings forth evil, for out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. Really, only one world power fits this description, and this picture gives you a clue, right? And that's the United States. The United States. And some people will, especially Americans, might be offended by that, and saying, well, aren't we the voice of democracy, they might say. Aren't we the ones who are the peacekeepers of the world? But if you look at the history of the United States, especially over the last 150 years, you will find over and over again the fact that they have worked behind the scenes to destroy even democracies. They've worked behind the scenes to attack countries that were peaceful. Iran, as an example, is today, essentially this religious state. But in 1950s, it was actually in the early stages of a democracy. But because of the fact that Iran was trying to hold the oil for themselves and wouldn't give it to the British or the Americans were instrumental in working with the British to destroy the democracy of Iran in order for them to get a hold of the oil. And that's just one story. You could go, and I could, there's whole books that have been written on it. Noam Chomsky, for instance, wrote a book, Who Rules the World? And it talks about a lot of these kinds of things that have happened clandestinely behind the scenes. So while the United States might present itself as a Christian nation, as the policeman of the world, as the force for good in the world, we have seen over and over again that they have actually been oppressive and actually a danger to the world. But one thing you cannot deny about the United States is they are the most powerful nation in the world. They spend more on their military than all other nations combined. They have troops in more countries. It's been a while since I've looked this up, but the last time I looked it up, the United States had troops in 140 countries. Might be a little bit lower right now, but probably not by much. Okay, no other country comes close to that. We talk about Russia. The big bad Russia right now is in the news. Okay, Russia is in a handful of countries in comparison. No other country is that. And when you understand the beast power, second beast is going to force the whole world to worship after the first beast. Well, that infrastructure is already in place. And I haven't even gone to the point that they're the reserve currency, right? I haven't even talked about the fact that 90% of all internet traffic goes through the United States. I haven't talked about the fact that most of the largest corporations in the world that control most of our life happen to be American. I haven't even talked about the fact that the media empires of the world that control the thoughts and values of the world are principally based in the United States and are American controlled. And that's just some of the ideas. So the whole presentation could easily be brought to get into this. The reason I'm going through this particular information quickly is because my Bible study series isn't trying to give you the nitty-gritty facts on all of the details of prophecy. There are other presentations that do that really well. I'm just trying to give you the 30,000-mile view, okay, to understand that God has a plan. God wasn't surprised by the rise of the United States. God wasn't surprised by the papacy. He saw it. He predicted it thousands of years before it happened. And all of these plans, these well-laid plans of the enemy are all ultimately going to be useless because God's going to win, okay? And so we don't need to worry about those things. It's good to be informed, but we don't need to worry about it. Revelation 13 continues talking about the second beast. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell in the earth by those signs which he has granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell in the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. What does it mean to make an image to the beast? Well, you're looking to bring the arguments necessary to convince people that the first beast power should be listened to. And when you consider the fact also, the other thing that the United States is preeminent on is that more money is spent on Christian programming in the United States than pretty much every other country combined. And that programming goes into all the world. And so then the United States is preeminent in its influence of Christianity in the whole world. And it uses its media power, and it uses its internet powers, and it uses its financial powers in order to get that message out to the whole world. And what message is being preached? Are they preaching the biblical message? Unfortunately, much of the Christian church is sincere, but they're sincerely wrong, and they're preaching a wrong message that contradicts the Bible. And as a result, they end up giving an image to the beast because they're causing the world to believe that it's okay to worship on Sunday, that it's okay to compromise on God's truth, that hellfire, for instance, exists, and those things. These are all doctrines of the papacy. It's the papacy that changed. It's from Saturday to Sunday, and they boast about that they made those changes, and all the rest of the churches followed suit. That's making an image to the beast. Though a passage suggests a false Holy Spirit, you will find a lot of mega churches in the United States and people that are carried away. I could bring up one name, would be Benny Hinn, right? If you see people like that, they can fill stadiums and everybody's all in awe, right? And there's this slaying of the Spirit and all this kind of thing. But where's the foundation? The foundation is not in the Word of God. You have to question the entire movement, because feelings aren't what counts, right? First and foremost, it's got to be based on the foundation of Jesus Christ and truth, right? And these two beasts will seek to impose a one world government, forcing everyone to do what they want or face the consequences. Revelation 13:7, no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now, at some points, it might have been easy for people to doubt whether or not the United States had this power or whether or not the world would do this. But today, right now, as we talk about vaccine mandates, right, what has happened? People are losing their employment because they're not following what the government is telling them to do. That's beast power level, right? It's saying you follow what we are asking or else we're taking everything away. Or I could talk about Guantanamo Bay. I could talk about September 11th, right, 2001. After that, people that were labeled terrorists lost all their status, right? If the state calls you a terrorist, they've passed laws. They can take away everything you own. They can take away your name. They can take away everything. And you become a big zero. They can take away your citizenship even. And so you become stateless. And they can lock you up in a prison and you have no status and no recourse and no legal options. They can do that. Right now, those laws have been to some, Islamic threats and stuff like that. But make no mistake, brothers and sisters, that law was written for Christians, because that's Satan's end game for Christians. But we don't have to worry about that. Okay, I say these things, it can be scary, but I also want to tell you that God foresaw these things, and guess what? God wins. Okay? God wins. They're not going to win. Satan thinks he's being smart. The elite of the world think they're being smart. I could talk to you about the New World Order, and I could talk to you about the Bilderberg Group, and I could talk to you about all the plans the billionaires are having and going, but none of those plans matter, which is why I don't spend a lot of time on them, because none of them ultimately matter, because God will win. What matters for you and I is that we know at least the general thing, like I said, this high-level view, so that we can be encouraged that if we do end up in prison, we do end up in a concentration camp, we do end up losing our status, he who endures to the end will be saved. Okay? Do not lose hope. Do not let Satan shake your faith, because ultimately truth wins. Ultimately God wins, and we know where we're going, and it is a wonderful place. And every wrong will be made right. Okay? So a time of trouble is coming. We've already talked about it in previous presentation. Time of trouble is coming. We'll have to learn to walk by faith alone in God. But we have this wonderful promise among many in Scripture. In Psalm 91, 5-8, it says, "You shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor of the arrow that flies by day, nor of the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor of the destruction that lays waste at noonday. 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not come near you. Only with your eyes shall you look and see the reward of the wicked." God is with us. God will guide us. God will protect us. This time of trouble must happen just before Jesus comes back. Matthew 24, we read this again in the last presentation. "There will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time. No, nor ever shall be. And unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened." So God will preserve his people during this scary time. And we must be grounded in the Bible and in our relationship with God. Amen? We have nothing to fear. So I've talked about a lot of stuff, and so a lot of the stuff has kind of gone by in a blur. Okay, but I want you to understand that what counts most isn't that you have every minute detail of the prophetic plan figured out, but that you know in whom you believe, that you have that solid faith in Him, that you believe in Him, you believe in His Word, and you will not let Him go. Don't let heaven or hell or angels or demons or governments or people shake you from your faith in God. Hold on to it to the end. And the Bible promises that you will be saved. Amen?